Now the talk today is, creating the sacred geometry of love. And it's a pretty specific topic. And we've spoken on feng shui, geomancy, ergonomic design all over the world. But all of these different systems, whether it's called feng shui, geomancy, or sacred geometry, or three-dimensional astrology, are all basically part of the same system. It's about understanding of how our personal dimensions in life apply within our world. Because after all, our experience of the world, despite the fact we have multiple levels, a great deal of it's through our physical body. And our physical body has dimensions.
And it seems, to some people think that this is so, interesting and esoteric or whatever, but it really all comes out of observation. It's very logical because, when you imagine yourself as early man on the planet, you had to have an understanding of why cycles happen, what things happen to change your life on this planet. Are there indicators? Are there things that we can look for that will prepare us for what's coming ahead? So even in Native American culture, there's medicine wheel. In Indian culture, there's Vastu Shastra. They're just different names for kind of the same analyzing the energies on the planet. And when you realize that piece, then you understand, if you can understand how energy moves, then you get to manipulate the energy to support what you want to do in a space. In other words, if you see that a lot of energy is directed towards something that's the color of red, that directs your energy. You get excited, you get hungry, you get the need to be active, which is why the stoplights are totally wrong. Traffic lights are completely wrong. Red means go. Green means relax.
Sure.
How many times are you behind somebody and you're like, it's green, let's go? But green signals the body to relax. The only one that's right is yellow. Because guess what yellow does? Stimulates your brain.
Right.
Should I speed up? Should I slow down? Is there a
Right.
cop around? What am I going to do? Yellow's perfect, but the other two are flipped. So when you see that, you say, well, I can't sleep in my bedroom, and you realize that you've got red pillows on the bed, and you go, oh, it's activating my energy. So you see, when you realize how easily it is to change them out for green pillows, sleepy, and you're good to go. So you've got an observation about how energy moves, and then you realize that you can change the energy in your space.
Exactly. Like, for instance, you paint your kitchen red and suddenly everyone is eating there all the time and your food bill is going up because you get in there and it's energizing. You paint it all blue and everyone goes on a diet. So.
When you're talking about the energy in a space or on the earth, that's one thing. But really what you want to most learn how to manipulate the energy of is human energy, is your energy. How do you feel when you walk into a space? Did you ever walk into a room or a house and it just feels good? And conversely, you walk into a space and it doesn't feel good at all? And so there are reasons for that, and part of that has to do with our aura. That's our externalized energy. And this first part of the aura only extends about a couple inches away from the body. It's called the physical aura. And it's almost like if someone would touch that part of your aura, it's almost like they're touching you directly. That's how sensitive it is and how physical it is. And so nobody's going to get into your personal space close enough to activate your physical aura. But it's an important thing, like when we're muscle testing or we're using a pendulum so that you can find out your polarities. You would actually dip into that physical aura. The second level of the aura is the emotional aura. It's not working. Is the emotional aura. And that's broader, about a hand's width or maybe a foot away from your body. And that changes a lot. It's emotional aura. So with your emotions, it's going to be flexing and moving. And that's the part, like if somebody just stands like just a little bit too close and they get into that emotional aura space, it's like, okay, back up a little bit.
Unless you like them, of course.
And then the outer aura is the spiritual aura, or sometimes called the solar aura. It stretches out your hand's width, for sure, and can go even farther. And when people see auras, they sometimes see the emotional aura, they mostly see the spiritual aura. But these energies are part of our being. And so when you walk through a space, you know, and maybe it's a little bit too narrow, but you think you can walk through this area without bumping into the chair. Say, imagine it was a little bit more narrow. But your aura needs a little bit more extra space. So you're always kind of feeling like a little bit just like that. So sometimes when we walk into offices particularly and the pathways are a little narrow and the little corner of the desk feels like it's shooting arrows at you right at your thigh, sometimes all you have to do is move it an inch, 2 inches, 3 inches apart, and then walk through this same area, and you just feel like it's more comfortable. You feel like it's bigger. There's other little tricks that we can do with that, but that aura is going to imprint when you stand in the doorway and you go, oh, that feels good. Then it paints good all over that area. So somebody else could come in that place and with their eyes shut, and they would just feel good because you left that there. If you left there, then they're going to pick that up too. So this is what we're trying to manipulate, the energy that you feel in a space.
And the point of this is that you are experiencing your space at all 3 levels. This is very important. People, they get up in their heads. They look at the space, they see the visuals. This is Art Digest, Architectural Digest. Why did architecture become so angular? It didn't used to be. Architecture used to be more homey and rounded, and if you look at the really old buildings, the big arched doorways, now it's gotten tremendously angular. Why? Because angles photograph better in art die.
In 2 dimensions.
In 2 dimensions.
Right.
When you take a photograph, it looks better. Curves and soft curves and human shapes, they don't work well. They're very hard to photograph. But if you want to make an impression, you want to get, I want to be on the cover of Art Die, you make angular things. Now what's really funny is that some of the sickest people we knew, and I mean in terms of health problems, were architects who had living in buildings that they had designed, that were designed like that. And when you look at the world's most famous architects, they all live in buildings that are like 100 years old. They were designed by somebody else that are rounded and soft and human shape. Because this tendency to go to these very sharp objects, which are very appealing to our eyes, do not satisfy those other parts of it, the fight or flight or the rest and digest. They want the soft environment. They want our mother's arms. They want that safe environment. And that's actually one of the reasons why it's very hard for people to change their environment, and it's very hard for them to change their diet. Why? Trust. Because when we were babies and we arrived in the world, someone else created a loving environment for us and fed us. So we associate food, the foods of our mother, with love. We equate the environment that we grew up in as the environment of love. When you set up your first apartment, you set up in the same shape as your mom's house or your parents' house. The couch went in the same place, TV went in the same place, you know, everything was arranged, you know, the kitchen cabinets, so everything was in the same relative position because that was your environment of love. Now, the problem there is that there's actually, it's a joke among astrologers, you know, that everyone has a natal chart, right? Well, know what a natal chart is? A natal chart, when you were born, was an astrological chart that your parents experienced and they got over. Guess who didn't? You live it, you live that experience. Well, you're a different person than your parents, and so the environment you need may be quite different from what your parents need. You know, you have the artistic child born to 2 accountants. Where did this child come from? Did they change him in the hospital? What? But this happens, or vice versa. 2 hippie artists and they have a kid who wants to become a banker. It happens, right? Well, that child's not going to need the environment that the parents live in, yet they will keep seeking that environment, which doesn't satisfy them because that is the environment of love. All they can hope for is either they take a class like this or they get involved with someone who creates the environment for them and they say, thank God, you know, this is very different from my parents, but I really like it. So that's why it's so hard to learn. So you have to be really willing to recognize that you are not your parents. You are allowed to have the environment that you like.
And don't confuse with familiar with comfortable.
Yes.
Because you have to create what's comfortable for you. And if if it feels right, it is right. And if it doesn't feel right, it's never going to feel right. The minute you hear yourself saying, oh, I'll get used to that noisy street out there, or I'll get used to that smell coming from that factory down the street or something like that. Bells should be going off in your head because that computer conscious mind, your brain will lie to you. Your body will not. So if your body goes like this, after time, yes, you won't react to that very much, but it will be turning its effect on you internally, and there's a price to pay for that, so.
When you sat in school, right, and if the desks when you were in grammar school were lined up along the side of the windows were almost always on your left-hand side. Why? Because right-handed people are better off if the light comes from this side because their hand doesn't block the paper. What about you lefties? It wasn't as good for you. It was not as good for you. So lefties have to work twice as hard oftentimes because they're working in the dark more often. But they design the space in order to take advantage of that orientation. In some classes, they put the windows all the way at the back, which works great, except for the fact that people at the back of the room get more light than the people in the front. But they've always put the small girls in the front of the room anyway because they felt they didn't want them not having to look over people. Well, have you noticed how many smaller women are in the professions? Oh, yeah. Tremendous number of physicians and attorneys. Well, they were right there with the teacher. And they really listened and they really followed the instructions. And this is the kind of thing, when you follow the instructions, you get a lot of attention. It leads you especially into the professions. And
big tall ones are in the back in the nosebleed seats, right?
We're in the back of the room. And it's funny because a lot of the top CEOs are very tall. Well, because they all developed a big view. They spent their whole life seeing the whole group,
But when you enter a space, we always orient the doorway from the outer world. You can't enter a space except through the number 11, 10, or 9 section, Sagittarius, Capricorn, or Aquarius, because that's the outer world. That's how you are seen in the world, and it's how you see the world.
And that's a two-sided sheet, of course.
Whereas the other part, the back opposite of the entry wall, is your inner life, your private life. And when you see what kinds of energies or areas of your life are related there, you can see that you're not showing the outer world your money in your bank, your resources, or you're not sharing your hearth, your meals with people from strangers from the outside world. So you're going to orient this space or this diagram on the entry wall. Now, we've got the doorway in the center, but it could be to the right, it could be to the left, it could be spanning two of them, But
which does changes the dynamic.
Exactly. And so it changes your experience of the space. It's interesting because we have, when kids go off to college, if they've had a bedroom with an entry wall, say in this number 9 section, which is about higher learning and travel and broadening your knowledge base, which is kind of going to college, you can pretty much figure that a child with a doorway on the number 9 section is going to intend to go away to college. But then they go to college and the doorway in their room is on the left side as they enter their room. And suddenly their major changes.
Yeah.
They were going to go into, a profession. They were going to be a lawyer or something. And now all of a sudden they're going to be in communications, or they're going to be in social work or the internet, or, those kinds of careers. So it's interesting to see those kinds of changes. Again, you change your space, then your space changes you.
Because you go in and your aura just projects into the entire space. So what you do is you basically create a little universe inside the room, and you start projecting your aura on the space. Whatever in the space then projects back on you. You're in continual communication with that. And as I mentioned before, see how the left is the self, the right is the relationship. When we reach out to people, we put our right hand out. We put the partnership side out. We protect our left side. Why? The left side is where all the vulnerable organs are. The spleen is there, the stomach is there. When people lie, something they teach in interrogation techniques, when people lie, they will tend to look down to the left. What they're actually doing is they're turning down towards their vulnerable organs. They're turning towards their weaker side, right? But when we really are speaking our truth, we look up and we look up to the right, because this is our strongest part of our body. That's why that right side over there, nurturing, which is also one of the love sections, is that section there. Because when we're projecting love and nurturing, we are at our best. We're at our strongest point because you're going beyond yourself. You know, you have to find some way to get beyond yourself. The left side, that's the self. Out there is we.
I have to mention really quickly, we did a consultation for a person who was a very successful esoteric professional, and we did a consultation in her space in New York City, and she was an Aries. And she said, oh, you know, my life is really kind of good. I could use a little help in my health, but, you know, the other thing, I really would like a relationship. I really would like a partner. So we looked, she's an Aries, so that's the natural part of the self. And when you're in that section, you're looking at the relationship. So it's like you looking at, you know, what you want in a relationship. And she had all these really fabulous images of powerful, strong women alone. You know, a head, a sculpture, and a painting, and, you know, individual images. You're like, pair them up a little bit because you're getting exactly what you're telling the universe. It's just that you're not sure what you're telling it sometimes. So, you know, oh, isn't that great? It's strong. It's, you know, it's individual. And yeah, but that's the relationship section. Yeah. The other thing that I like to caution people is, don't put your altar there. Don't put your shrine there. Don't put your meditation space there necessarily, because
if you want to develop
it's a solitary thing. So if you want to have a relationship, think about pairs.
Though I will warn you, this is a little caveat. If your life is really good and you do not want things to change, do not move stuff. Sometimes you move a little bit, it's not a problem, but there's certain spots in your environment that have a lot of leverage. I mean, a lot of leverage. You put something there and it's just taking a key and going crank. It just changes. Other places it doesn't affect it so much. You know, you change something behind the door, big deal, you know. So, but if you change things in certain spots, especially in that partnership section, middle of the right-hand wall, right corner, it changes how you're relating to people. But if you want things to change, well, figure out what you want to change. And what we're going to actually talk about in the Sacred Triangles is the power of threes, as it says in your handout. We're changing 3 different related spots that have a tremendous amount of leverage when they work together.
And that's really important, and I know we're getting ahead of ourselves just a little bit, but we've had a lot of people make a change in one area, or if you've just studied a little bit of feng shui, oh, let me activate the money section, you know, and that's that left-hand corner from the entry wall, right? So they activate the money section. Well, the left wall is savings in the bank, real estate, property, assets. The part of the back wall, that left third, that's what money can do for you. Money changing hands, that's investments, that's buying things, that's, you know, money is not a static thing. But the real key and the real eye-opener from the Western perspective is that income is not either one of those 2 sections. Income is money earned from your daily work. It's the number 11 section. 11 and Aquarius has to do with your community, your friends, the outer world, the people that you connect with. Do you make a single dime if you don't connect with people? No.
To go outside
so
your door.
This is where money flows in through the number 11 section and either goes in the bank in the number 2 section or goes out through your pocket in the number 3 section. So there alone, you see the power of 3, because if you want to activate money, you don't necessarily want to activate the spending part of it if you're trying to increase the income part of it. So you want to understand all these sections and do them in 3s that support each other.
Right. And another little caveat, don't change too many things at one time. Okay? It's just like taking herbs. You don't take too many different herbs at once. You let your body get used to it. Change something and let your body get used to the different change in frequency.
And we definitely have time for questions at the end because this is going to be filmed. And this is going to be shown on our website, so you're going to always be able to see this workshop again as well.
The highlights. The highlights reel.
So this gives you an idea of how we overlaid the 12-part system over the classic 8-part Chinese system. And
so much so that even in Chinese astrology, they measure everything from the pole, where we measure from the equator. So the 2 approaches are even very different. So it's really quite remarkable.
And let me give you another difference that's telling. Saturn is the planet of rules, restriction, and the father and regulations and things like that. Jupiter is the planet of expansion and opportunity and optimism. And in Asian culture, their favorite planet is Saturn.
Right.
And in our culture, our favorite planet is Jupiter. So we just have a very different perspective on what life should be like. Their ideal life is every day should kind of be the same as the day before, and nothing's shaking everything up.
If your parents were farmers, you're going to be a farmer.
That sounds kind of boring to us in the West, so.
Yeah. So, and the difference is also the numbers too. The Chinese system uses 8. Well, that in Chinese music they have 8 notes. In our system, we have, of course, the 7 notes, but when we have the 5 sharps and flats, 12. There's actually 12 notes in our system. Well, when you go into sacred geometry, the Chinese system really kept the high stuff really for the royalty. The other stuff was not available to people, though they used it very widely among other people. Here, we primarily use sacred geometry in the building of sacred buildings. So it was used in most public buildings, even buildings up valley. Many of our most famous, what are called our ghost wineries. The man who built it was called Hiram McIntyre, and they're built in the late 1800s. And it was a period of when sacred geometry was very important. So if you actually look at the dimensions and orientations of these buildings, it's using like number 72. 72 is the number of the goddess. It's 72 feet wide, deep, 100 feet long. That's Inglenook is designed that way. And many of them were designed this way with very specific angles, and the golden mean was built into them. Partly because, and this was the long tradition, it was partly because they found that the buildings would last longer. The reason the golden mean is so effective is it's the ideal angle for a roof to shed water. If you make it steeper, it goes too fast and ruins the roof. If it's shallower, the snow doesn't fall off. But it's the perfect mean to deal with nature, and that's what it's based upon. So this was woven in there. When we started going to modern architecture and Art Digest showed up, things started going out the window. We started getting flat roofs and things like that. And that came out of the Second World War and the use of industrial materials. But this tradition of building buildings that were very much in harmony with nature, that's an ancient tradition. Where sacred geometry is really interesting is that you get to use it in your personal life. We use it all the time, just most people don't use it well. They don't realize they're doing it. We all have certain favorite spots we like to put stuff. We all have certain areas, when we arrange a room, we have certain orientations. They say in the kitchen, you always want to have your 3 spots. The first thing you do when you come in the kitchen is, where's my 3 locations? We're very conscious of that geometry that we work with. But there's certain geometries that have a lot of power.
So let's just talk quickly about the other parts that are divided into 2 sections as opposed to the 1 section in the Asian system. So when you look at that area that we call creativity and nurturing, that's the number 5 Leo and the number 6 Virgo section. And creativity in that sense really is Leo. That's the Leo part of it. The nurturing part is the Virgo part. So Leo, that's your talent. That's your being on display. That's the sun shining. What can you do to entertain me? It's art. It's creation. It's literal creation. It's creating children.
The heart.
It's romance. And it's the part of love that's romantic. So when people say, oh, I want to activate my love section, they're usually guided over to Libra for the relationship section. But relationship is formal. It's not romantic.
Walking down the aisle.
So if you want to look at those 3 sections together, 5, 6, and 7, they actually 4 all the way up to 8, they all describe from romance to Virgo is the part where you say, well, you're cute, but would I get up at 3 o'clock in the morning if you're sick and help take care of you? So that's the number 6 section. And then you say, oh, or you say, they really messed up their checkbook. Should I help them get it straightened out or what?
Or you just reach across and you fix their hair for them, something like that. It's the caring, it's the refining. So if you ever saw the movie Confessions of a Geisha, and there's a whole process where the geisha is being dressed. She's being prepared to go out the door. It's the same thing when you watch a bride being prepared. It's that Virgo section, that refinement, the precision, it's the caring for someone else.
So there's the romance. Then you decide, oh, maybe he's a keeper because, or she's a keeper because I would take care of her or whatever. Let's formalize this relationship, and that's the number 7 Libra section. And anybody who has had a big wedding or even a small wedding knows that there's nothing really very romantic about that whole process. You know, it's signed on the dotted line, you know, you will agree to this and I will agree to that. It's taking care of a lot of details that Virgo brought along with it, you know, and you have this fun day, and hopefully by that time that all that planning that is the hard part, you know, the Libra, all the contracts are in place, not just between you and the intended, but, you know, all your vendors and all your people and all that kind of stuff. You know, it's a business deal. Let's face it, it's a business deal.
I always like to say that number 5 section is where the phrase, you know, a faint heart never won a fair lady. It's really about, are you willing to, you know, step beyond yourself and go meet someone. Number 6 is basically when the father says to the guy, well, do you have a job? You know, and the mom thinks, you know, is she a good cook? You know, do you have a skill? And that, because number 6 is a very skill-based area. Do you have good skills are part of going into a relationship? And number 7 is where you basically sign on the dotted line. It's about partnerships and relationships. And it could be business partnerships as well, or any kind of place where you work in cooperation with other people.
And number 8 is where you work out the power struggle, you know,
Yes.
who takes charge of the checkbook and,
Sharing a bed.
you know, we share a bedroom and what's up with that, and all these, you know, little power things that go on into the relationship. They get resolved or not in the number 8 section.
Now,
But so think about very literally.
I should mention too that there's 2 other sections that relate to love, okay? The 2 other sections are number 2, Taurus, and that area there, which is basically the same area that relates to money, it has to do with our sense of personal beauty. It also has to do with money in the bank. So it used to be like the woman would come with a dowry, but also our sense of personal beauty. And the number 12 section, which is basically romance. That's the Pisces section. It's about belief in a relationship. So those, when we get to the triangles and those 2 areas get activated, that's why I wanted to mention to them, because love is also about, where am I in this situation? What is my desire for personal enrichment? What is my belief? And that's part of the dynamic. You know, when we enter a relationship, we're not fused. We're still individual people, but there's places where we cross over each other.
I was just going to say in the Taurus section, that's I'll feed you.
Yes.
And in fact, in
Chinese,
Chinese, there's a couple more, but there's 2 basic ways to say I love you, and one is I feed you,
yes,
and the other one is I sing you.
yes, that's the romantic one.
So
If you really want to be busy, the last place you want to live is in wine country. And the reason is there are very few places on earth that are created in such a harmonious way. Think about it. You go up into the valley, it's beatific. Things, you know, these beautiful corn rows of vines going up the hills, everything's aligned with a great sensitivity to nature. People are very conscious of it. There's not that many places where people do that, honestly. You come here, you could starve as a feng shui practitioner very easily.
to say nothing of the fact that people drink a lot of wine, so they get along very well.
Yes.